The number of people being diagnosed with skin cancer has more than doubled in the UK since the 1990s, and it's projected to rise even further over the next decade. And it's a problem that's led to a party-wide government inquiry and a detailed report calling it a preventable crisis. And to be honest, it's really hard to argue with that assessment. I was lucky enough to be invited to speak at Parliament as part of the inquiry which led to this report, thanks to my association with the British Beauty Council. What I learnt there and from the subsequent report was interesting, important, mostly annoying, to be honest with you, and really shocking that it's 2026 and this is still what we're talking about. So today I want to talk about what the report uncovered, the issues the UK and really the rest of the world is currently facing, and what changes need to be made to manage this growing crisis. It's a crisis. Now, many of you probably know that I've been promoting the benefits and the importance of using sunscreen pretty much on a daily basis for years now. And to be honest, when I first got the invitation to Parliament as a British Beauty Council Advisory Board member, I was kind of expecting the same beauty industry focused conversations about sunscreen and the same conversations I was used to. Use it every day when the UV's 2 and above, reapply, blah, 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 blah. Talking about the importance of SPF for skincare, raising public awareness, and discussing the beauty industry standards when it comes to SPF. But I very quickly realized that this discussion stretched far beyond the beauty industry alone. This inquiry included doctors, researchers, cancer charities, policymakers, educators, so many more other people, and it was clear that this was an issue that was much more than just about beauty. The inquiry was carried out by the APPG for Beauty, Hair and Wellbeing, with help from organisations like the British Beauty Council, various trade associations and UK cancer charities. The APPG for Beauty, Hair and Wellbeing is an all-party parliamentary group that brought together industry leaders, members of parliament and health experts to investigate the growing concerns around UV safety in the UK. And their findings are very concerning. Across the various sessions the APPG held, they had dermatologists discussing rising skin cancer cases, researchers presenting evidence on changing public attitudes towards sun exposure, cancer charities explaining the consequences of delayed diagnosis, real people who'd been diagnosed with skin cancer discussing their experience, economists outlining the financial burden preventable illnesses placed on the NHS, and educators talking about young people getting health advice, almost entirely through social media, and that's the scariest bit to me. I forgot to mention that Latest in Beauty and the British Beauty Council also teamed up to create this beauty box. This is, I believe, over £100 worth of product for £66. This isn't sponsored or affiliate link or anything like that. So in this box, you get some very popular and favorite sunscreens like the Hello Sunday one for your lips, that's an SPF 50, Ultraviolet Preen Screen, another SPF 50, which is a reapplication mist, and Supergoop Play, this is a mineral sunscreen, as well as all these other products here. There are loads. In here though, you also get a sun safety and skin cancer booklet from the Skin Charity. You get this really nice little like mole checker. Nice, it's handy, it's very important. And then you get this protective case from Greenknot? I don't know, but it's a UV protection case, which is going to prevent your sunscreens from breaking down, keep everything as potent as possible. So I will link that all in the description box down below. The session I attended was about the last point, the role media plays and how people in the UK perceive the risk associated with UV exposure. I know I keep saying the UK, but this is a broader thing. This isn't just the UK, it's because we're based in the UK, but this covers everywhere. It included speakers like beauty journalist Kathy Phillips, Mary Tudor, the CEO of skin cancer charity Skin, a wellness and biohacking influencer, and myself. You could probably tell the conversation got interesting there. This session examined how online content can shape the way the public thinks about sunscreen use and tanning culture, as well as misinformation surrounding UV exposure, how that spreads, and possible ways to stop it spreading. Now, I've been talking about this issue for a while now, but this session and the inquiry as a whole really reinforced that the misinformation we see online isn't just harmless myths or outdated beauty advice. It's a serious threat to the health and well-being of hundreds of thousands of people every single year. The UV culture war has been raging online for decades now, with countless content creators and alleged experts spreading misinformation on sunscreen, about sunscreen, the effects of UV exposure, but it's a problem that's becoming more and more widespread. It's becoming an increasingly bigger issue in recent years, with the more self-proclaimed experts coming online, and even just bad experts, let's be honest, and spreading their out-of-date misinformation. Somehow, very basic sun protection advice has become controversial, and if you spend enough time online, especially in beauty, wellness, or lifestyle spaces, you start to see just how normalized UV misinformation has become. In fact, I'm going to play some of the worst offenders throughout this video. You'll see plenty of creators making all sorts of false claims about sunscreen and UV exposure, usually in the same breath that they're talking about seed oils.
What is your beef with sunscreen?
So my major problem with sunscreen, seed oils as a base, very high linoleic acid oils, and that many of them have very nasty components.
Many of which make people hesitant to use sunscreen. Probably the most widespread example of this is the idea that sunscreen is toxic and that it actually causes cancer rather than preventing it. But we know the truth about this claim is based on people misinterpreting studies that were done on animals. They read the summary or the conclusion and see that an ingredient contained in some chemical sunscreens might cause cancer in rats. But guess what? We're not rats. They don't actually bother reading the whole study and don't have that scientific training to understand it even if they did. What a lot of people do is they'll read that conclusion, the summary of the study, and that's what they start making content on. We see a lot of the wellness people, the biohacking, the crunchy mums, they fail to read the study. So they read this conclusion that really doesn't mean anything and has completely taken the study out of context. For some reason though, they decide they know better than all the scientists who tell them they've misunderstood what the study says. Others just seem to hate the idea of chemicals being in any products whatsoever, so they've just randomly decided that because skin cancer rates are going up around the world, it might be because more people are using sunscreens with chemicals in them. This means they either don't understand or are choosing to ignore the fact that everything in the world is made of chemicals. Water is of course a chemical, air made of chemicals, every vegetable you eat is made of chemicals. Just because you don't recognize the name of the chemical, it doesn't mean it causes cancer, which is one of the main things they say. If I can't eat it, why would I put it on my, like, what the fuck does that mean? If I can't eat it, why would I put it on my skin? How is that relevant? What? And to be completely clear, despite the fact that people have been using sunscreen for almost 100 years, there is still no evidence that either physical or chemical sunscreens cause cancer. Anyone trying to tell you there are studies saying they do cause cancer is either lying so they can sell you something, sell you their beef tallow zinc sunscreen, they haven't actually read the studies, or isn't educated enough to understand the studies even if they did read them. The scientists who actually know what they're talking about agree that there is no evidence sunscreen causes cancer. Just look it up. How many people a year die from skin cancer versus how many people die a year because of sunscreen filters? Another famous example of sunscreen misinformation is the idea that oxybenzone, a fairly common ingredient in chemical sunscreens, a very nice one, is disrupting your hormones. And this is based on animal studies that showed hormone disruption in rats when they fed them a huge dose of oxybenzone. But the people pushing this fear-mongering fail to mention that the dose the humans get from wearing sunscreen is tiny in comparison to what the rats are exposed to. Also the fact that we aren't rats being force-fed oxybenzone. In fact, Harvard Medical School has even pointed out that a person would have to use sunscreen every day for 277 years in order to get the same dose as was given to the rats. So maybe if humans start living until almost 300 years old, then oxybenzone in sunscreen might be something we'd have to worry about, but we'll worry about that when it comes to that. And it's the same story for pretty much every negative thing these influencers have to say about using sunscreen. It's always based on either a complete misunderstanding of scientific studies, a deliberate misinterpretation of information to support their agenda, or to sell something, or often they've just made shit up. Even the most accurate claim these sunscreen fearmongers make, that you shouldn't use sunscreen because your body needs exposure to the sun so it can naturally produce vitamin D, isn't completely accurate. Yes, your body does need exposure to UVB rays to produce vitamin D, but because most people aren't great at applying as much sunscreen as you're actually supposed to, or as often as you're supposed to, experts say you're likely still getting more than enough exposure to UV rays to produce vitamin D, even if you are using sunscreen. It's also going to get in through your hair, top of your hair, places where you've not covered up. And the fearmongers also often forget to mention that you can also get vitamin D from foods like fish, egg yolks, red meat, and many other sources, or you can just take a vitamin D supplement if it's really that big of a concern for you. But it's far better to get a blood test done to see if you're actually low in vitamin D and tackling that with your diet or a supplement than it is to not use sunscreen and put yourself at risk of skin cancer because you don't want to wear sunscreen because you want vitamin D. It just doesn't make sense. What's concerning though is that more people every day are being taken in by the fear-mongering surrounding sunscreen. Especially during COVID, there was a massive rise in anti-science sentiment with so-called wellness influencers convincing people that they knew better than actual scientists and doctors. And since then, that anti-science wellness space has continued to grow. People are pulled in by the idea that they're getting back to what's natural and doing their own research. There's nothing wrong with doing your own research, don't get me wrong, except for most of the time it just consists of believing whatever your favorite wellness influencer tells you, regardless of what science actually says. You can find anything you want on Google. Type in sunscreen gives you cancer, you're gonna get articles that says sunscreen gives you cancer. Type in sunscreen doesn't give you cancer, you're gonna get articles that says just that. All backed up by experts. It's really all just an expansion of the clean beauty or natural wellness spaces online, which I've talked about a lot before. Most people in those spaces start off from a genuine desire to live a healthier life that just gets a little out of control and extreme. They all turn into conspiracy theorists. This is how we got to a place where people believe getting a base tan protects you from sunburn and UV damage naturally, that you should be making your own sunscreen at home from beef tallow and zinc oxide powder. Imagine if making your own sunscreen was that easy. Brands would be launching them all the time. Or that even raspberry seed oil and carrot seed oil are natural sunscreens. None of this is true. And this is actually something that came up in our chat in Parliament. One of the other people in the room believed that oils gave you UV protection, and we all had to be like, that's not true, that's not true. This person who was more in the wellness space, whose videos I've seen since, posts this kind of content, misinterpreting studies, leading to misinformation, leading to untrue facts about sunscreen use, which honestly is dangerous. Going back to base tans though, because I used to believe this one before I used to go and sunbathe in Tenerife with like factor 4 carrot oil on. Base tans are still evidence that you've damaged your skin. There is some evidence that it give you an SPF of like between 2 and 4, but that's pointless. It's not adequate to anything. You're still gonna burn and get UV damage. Making your own sunscreen at home is never going to be as effective as a professionally made sunscreen. You won't know what SPF you have because it hasn't been tested. Zinc naturally tends to clump up together, giving you patchy coverage with unprotected areas, and there are a whole host of other potential issues. And raspberry and carrot oil being natural sunscreens is another example of people misinterpreting data from studies that they don't understand. Neither is proven to provide a significant level of SPF in any way whatsoever. People believe you can stack these oils, stack of 4, stack of 2, stack of 5, and make factor 11. I don't know. That's not how it works. This is one of the main issues identified in the inquiry. Again and again, the APPG heard concerns about how misinformation spreads on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. We all know by now that algorithms on these social media apps consistently reward sensationalism and emotionally driven content over facts and nuance. Dermatologists saying wear sunscreen is boring. It doesn't make people excited to watch, but influencers saying everything you've been told about sunscreen is a lie is much more exciting, so the algorithm pushes it out to more people and that content performs much better. In fact, some of the videos I've included in today's video as examples, these are from small curators whose anti-sunscreen videos are the ones that go viral. So they're gonna keep posting it. The more people see it, the more people believe it. It doesn't matter if it's true. And there's so many people making careers out creating content that's dramatic sounding, but based completely in lies and misinterpretation of data. Anti-sunscreen rhetoric in particular has become a staple of the natural wellness and clean beauty communities. But there's one statistic I heard during APPG's inquiry that I think everyone should keep in mind. It's estimated that only about 4% of all dermatology content online is actually created or verified by dermatologists. 4%. Social media has created an environment where wellness and beauty creators can speak far outside of their area of expertise to millions of people with almost no accountability if what they're saying is inaccurate or even dangerous. All whilst actual experts struggle to make themselves heard because what they're saying isn't sensational or dramatic in any way, it's just facts. The very harsh reality of a world where influencers and con men are allowed to say whatever they want online is that it's normal people who get hurt, the ones who who just want to protect their families from what they thought were dangerous chemicals, or just want to live what they think is a healthier lifestyle. It's actually shocking how far the conversation surrounding UV damage online has drifted from actual facts. The opinions of unqualified influencers often carry more weight nowadays than what real scientists say. That's why I constantly push actual scientists and talk about actual scientists and make videos like this. But the evidence presented to the inquiry was very clear. UV radiation is classified by the World Health Organization as a Group 1 carcinogen. That's the same category as tobacco and asbestos. I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that, because the way some people talk about it now doesn't convey the real danger sun damage poses. Tanning is becoming increasingly popular again, especially worryingly amongst younger generations. It's like it's an aspirational thing again to be tanned, where I feel like for a while we'd moved away from that. Not completely, but the way we view tanning had definitely changed. This resurgence really of the Y2K trends weirdly seems to have brought tanning back into popularity again as well, with TikTok and Instagram full of young people talking about the best ways to tan, seeking out particularly high UV places or specific days to go tanning. They're even using apps to, like tanning apps, to schedule their tanning, and generally acting like it's a perfectly safe and healthy thing to be doing. And that's worrying because skin cancer rates have been increasing dramatically over the last few decades. Melanoma rates specifically, which is the deadliest type of skin cancer, are around 2.5 times higher now than they were in the 1990s. The UK now ranks among the countries with the highest melanoma incidence rates globally, and every year around 2,600 people in the UK die from melanoma. How many people die a year from sunscreen use? None. That's more than 7 deaths every single day. Cases of non-melanoma skin cancer have also increased rapidly in the last decade, going from around 156,000 new cases diagnosed annually in 2018 to 250,000 a year by 2024. And the latest data shows that around another 1,200 people die every year from non-melanoma skin cancer. And reading the report that APPG inquiry came out with really helped bring home how serious this is. They had a wide range of people speak about their actual lived experience with the dangers of UV damage, including cancer survivors, current patients, their families, healthcare workers, actual people living with the long-term consequences of skin cancer. One of the speakers was Shane McCormick, a landscaper who spent most of his life working outdoors, exposed to the sun every single day. He's a 5-time skin cancer survivor, and he now advocates for making sunscreen mandatory personal protective equipment for outdoor workers, which is understandable, especially seeing as outdoor workers face a 60% higher chance of non-melanoma skin cancer than people who work indoors. And 1 in 3 non-melanoma cancer deaths worldwide is associated with working outdoors in the sun. Another speaker was Jessica Zinden Webster. She was diagnosed with skin cancer when she was just 26. After surgery, that meant they had to remove Jessica's entire lower eyelid to remove the tumor. She's since gone on to found the Axe the SPF tax campaign, which aims to make sun protection more accessible by advocating for the removal of the 20% VAT tax on sunscreen. What struck me the most was how ordinary many of these stories sounded. They weren't people who were going out to tan all the time. They weren't using sunbeds and baby oil or tanning oil or anything like that. They weren't reckless or extreme cases. They were just normal people who underestimated the risk because culturally we've never treated UV exposure without the seriousness that we probably should have. What's crazy is that most of this can be avoided. The inquiry heard evidence that around 86% of melanoma skin cancers are considered preventable, and for non-melanoma skin cancers, that figure rises to around 90%. So between 86 and 90% of all skin cancer cases in the UK could have been prevented by limiting UV exposure, including using sunscreen. But at the exact same time, we're seeing cancer rates rising. Social media is increasingly convincing people that UV exposure is fine, that sunscreen is a real danger. I honestly think part of the reason this rhetoric spreads so effectively is because modern wellness culture online has trained people to fear anything that sounds synthetic or like it was created in a lab, more than they fear the things that are actually proven dangers. So people become terrified of sunscreen filters or parabens or preservatives, all while willingly exposing themselves to direct UV radiation, repeated sunburn, tanning beds, and chronic UV exposure, all things that are clearly established causes of cancer. That's something the inquiry identified as a real concern. We're living in a moment where the medical evidence around the dangers of UV damage is becoming stronger and more urgent, but online narratives are moving us in the opposite direction. But when you actually listen to the doctors, researchers, and cancer patients describe the real world consequences of skin cancer, it becomes very hard to see anti-sunscreen content as harmless internet discourse, especially when you realize that the people seeing this kind of content the most are often the ones who are most impressionable and at risk from sun damage. One of the inquiry's biggest concerns was with regards to how children and teenagers view UV damage and the importance of sunscreen use, particularly because young people tend to be more heavily swayed by social media than anything else. Reports have shown that the vast majority of children and young adults in the UK are on social media in some form or another, with some studies also estimating that despite age restrictions, there are millions of children under the age of 13 on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And that makes the spread of misinformation incredibly worrying because avoiding UV damage at a young age is an important part of lowering the risk of developing skin cancer later in life. When the experts invited to talk by the APBG spoke about UV damage, they kept returning to the same point over and over again. This is cumulative. This isn't something that resets every summer. Skin damage from UV exposure builds up over time, and childhood exposure matters enormously when it comes to long-term cancer risks. The inquiry heard that getting 5 sunburns across your lifetime more than doubles your overall risk of developing melanoma. I am filming on one of the hottest days of the year so far here in the UK. It's been 4 days, 4 days that we've had sun here in the UK, and my Instagram stories is filled with people out in the sun getting sunburns, that redness on their shoulders, and that will happen a couple of times this year. Is all building up. But even just getting a single sunburn that causes blistering during your childhood more than doubles the risk of developing melanoma later in life. I won't go into them all here, but there are a lot of reasons that means children's skin is more vulnerable to developing skin cancer if exposed to UV damage, which is why another statistic from the inquiry really stuck with me. Of all the UV exposure a person accumulates by the time they reach 60, around half that happens before the age of 20. That's worrying because that's the period that our skin is most vulnerable. And because skin cancer can take a long time to develop, any damage caused at a young age has more time to turn to skin cancer later on in life. You might not get diagnosed with it until you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, or even later, but the damage that caused it was done decades before. I did a video that a couple of years ago, the older generation who were tanning like crazy in the 70s when it was a trend, they're all now getting diagnosed, not all of them, but a lot of them are getting diagnosed with skin cancer. And that's another reason why we're seeing these diagnoses more now, more than ever. It's not because more people are using sunscreen, it's because we can catch it quicker. It's just showing up on people's skin and people are actually getting checked. Another concern is that on top of being the most at risk to UV damage from the sun, young people are also most likely to be making this even worse by using sunbeds. And a lot of them don't even realize that UV from sunbeds is just as dangerous as UV from the sun. Like UV radiation from the sun, sunbeds are also classified as a group 1 carcinogen. Again, that's the highest cancer risk category. But despite this, research has shown that 43% of people aged between 18 to 25 in the UK use sunbeds. That's an insane number. And worse is that only 52% of 18 to 25-year-olds knew that sunbed use increased the risk of skin cancer, while 23% actually thought it reduced the risk of skin cancer. That's crazy to me. I use sunbeds. I used them when I was a teenager because I thought I looked good. I had a lot of dark spots back then. The truth is that using sunbeds before the age of 35 has been proven to increase melanoma risk by 59%. What's even more worrying is that investigations have shown that 34% of 16 and 17-year-olds in the UK are using sunbeds, despite it being illegal for under 18s. And the government has even admitted that children as young as 14 have been allowed to use sunbeds. Though some people who gave evidence in the APPG's inquiry said that even younger children, down to the age of 10, are able to access tanning salons in some places. This is possible because despite the ban on under 18 having been in place since 2011, bizarrely there is no requirement for mandatory ID checks. The UK government has finally proposed making it mandatory last month, but if they get approved, the new laws won't come into effect until 2027 at the earliest. exist. The inquiry's findings made it very obvious that far more needs to be done to protect the public, especially young people, from the harm that UV exposure can cause. Because the lack of education around UV safety is an issue that seems to be getting worse at the moment, and without the government stepping in, young people are likely to keep believing whatever the social media algorithms push to them and tell them. And the evidence is so clear that when misinformation around UV and sunscreen reaches adults, it can be dangerous enough. But when it shapes how young people think and behave at a time when protection from UV radiation is most important for them, it becomes a ticking time bomb for their health and well-being in the future. So what needs to change? Well, Cancer Research UK says that melanoma cases are projected to rise by a further 9% in the next 12 years. That means even more people and their families every year having to deal with the stress and pain of a cancer diagnosis, more people going through draining cancer treatment, and more people ultimately dying from something that can so easily be prevented. And if none of that makes you think change needs to be made, then maybe the finances of it will. NHS data suggests that skin cancer treatment is costing the health service approximately £750 million every single year. And that figure is about to continue rising if cases of skin cancer do as well. So if we want to stop that happening, we need to start making changes. And the APPG's report lays out several ways we can combat rising skin cancer cases. The first recommendations that APPG have made is for the government to work with industry, health psychologists, and behavioral change experts to create a long-term public health campaign that would inform and educate the public about UV safety, as part of making UV safety something that is seen as more important by the public in general. They've also recommended that GPs should have to ask about UV exposure alongside other normal consultation questions like diet, alcohol consumption, and tobacco use. They also want retailers to shelf sun protection in the same areas as skincare and body care products, rather than in a separate holiday section, which just reinforces the false idea that sunscreen is only needed if you're going to the beach or away to another country that just so happens to be hotter. In addition, a national health campaign aimed at educating the public about UV safety. The APPG's report has also made it clear how important it is to improve the way we treat education on this topic in schools. They've recommended changes like improving and standardizing mandatory UV safety education in primary schools and secondary schools, as well as making sure that all education around UV safety is inclusive so that people with darker skin tones understand that UV exposure also affects them, and so they know how to spot early signs of skin cancer, which may present differently on deeper skin. They've also recommended the government should make it mandatory for all education and training courses in hairdressing, barbering, and beauty therapy to include compulsory training on identifying suspicious moles or lesions to improve early diagnosis of skin cancer. And I actually love this. In fact, Skin, the cancer charity I mentioned earlier, have already been running an accreditation program in melanoma and skin cancer early detection for hair, health, and beauty industry professionals. They've apparently trained over 10,000 professionals through this program already, leading to more than 400 early skin cancer detections in just the last year, which I think is amazing, because you think when you go to your hairdresser, they're constantly looking at you. They're up in your face. They're checking your face. They can see it around the ears. I think that's amazing. I think that's such a good idea. And it's a change that has already been proven to make a difference to people's lives, like a real world difference. Another proposed change is one I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Jessica Zyden-Webster, who started the Axe the SPF tax campaign. The APP agreed with Jessica's take on the issue, saying that the 20% tax VAT should be reduced to 0 on all children's products with an SPF of 30 and above, and reduce it to 5% for products for adults that are SPF 30 and above. I believe that's happened. I'll double check that, but I think that might have gone through. This was after hearing evidence that many people in the UK don't buy sunscreen because they can't afford to. You know, you get these tiny, where's my sunscreen? You get these tiny bottles, like I love this sunscreen, but this was expensive for that. Research in 2024 found that 64% of the UK population believes that sun protection is too expensive, while an estimated 10 to 15% of the population don't buy it at all because of how expensive it is. Previous studies have also shown that 31% of parents have said they can't always afford to apply sun protection to the whole family because they can't afford it. And with the rising cost of living, issues like this are only going to get worse if real changes aren't made. And it could be so simple to make such a huge difference here. Modeling has suggested that if the average price of sunscreen dropped by just 15%, it would increase sunscreen use by 23%, which alone could prevent up to 3,200 cases of melanoma every year. And while some people complain that not charging 20% VAT on sunscreen would mean the government loses tax revenue of £67 million per year, others have pointed out that it would also save the NHS almost twice as much, an estimated 128 million annually to be precise. So for most people, the idea of removing 20% VAT tax on sun protection makes perfect sense, particularly when you think about the fact that sunscreen is currently taxed as if it were a luxury cosmetic, and not what it really is, an important part of preventative healthcare. Another change proposed by the APPG is for the government to make sun protection like hats, glasses, appropriate clothing, and of course sunscreen, part of the compulsory PPE for outdoor workers, and to classify UV exposure from the sun as an occupational hazard. Now this might sound a little extreme to some people, but as we've seen, outdoor workers are at a much greater risk of developing skin cancer, and that isn't a coincidence. Other countries like Germany have actually already started classifying UV exposure this way. In 2018, Germany had over 10,000 cases of work-related skin cancer reported, which made it the third most reported occupational disease in the country. That's clearly a threat to health and safety that needs to be taken seriously. They've also recommended a whole list of changes to the sunbed industry. I say ban it. They say a ban on sunbed advertising, promotion and sponsorship in all media outlets and social media platforms, as well as putting warnings on sunbeds about the risks of skin cancer, similar to how cigarette packets have to have the warnings on them, you know, those graphic pictures, which makes sense when you remember that UV from sunbeds and tobacco both group 1 carcinogens, and they want government to ban all unsupervised or coin-operated sunbeds because that's how all those underage children are getting access to sunbeds when they aren't legally allowed to. And they're also encouraging the government to consider an outright ban of sunbeds entirely, as several other countries have done, including Australia and Brazil. They've already taken this measure and have seen notable benefits to public health, as well as a burden on their health systems. And finally, the area I've had the most experience with, the APPG have also proposed several changes in order to tackle the spread of misinformation online. Firstly, they've urged the government to use the existing Online Safety Act to compel social media platforms to take more responsibility for stopping the spread of UV and sunscreen misinformation on their platforms. They also want platforms to introduce fact-checking tools or information panels that flag UV misinformation, which is something we've already seen on other kinds of misinformation. I think you see it on Twitter a lot. I will never fucking call that thing X. Twitter. They want a verification process for medical experts online, similar to the way YouTube labels certified dermatologists. This is something I brought up because I think this is a great way to see who is speaking, why is that person in scrubs, why do they have that doctor title, is their expertise relevant to what they're talking about. And they've also encouraged people in the dermatological, academic and research communities to make an effort to build a presence on social media, because that's where most young people are getting their information these days, whether we like it or not. And it's worth noting that there is a long list of trusted and well-respected organizations that also support the recommendations the APPG has made, like Cancer Research UK, the cancer charity Skin, Melanoma UK, and of course the British Beauty Council. The British Beauty Council played a large role in helping the APPG carry out this detailed inquiry, and I'm incredibly grateful that I was able to be part of it because of them, because it's an important issue that I really do care about, and I learned a lot from being involved in this. I've been talking for years about the importance of sun protection, both for preventing aging as well as for health reasons, but this inquiry really reinforced that sunscreen is important for far more than just preventing wrinkles, leathery skin, or uneven skin tone. Hopefully the beauty industry and the UK as a whole can learn from the findings from this inquiry and can make changes that are actually going to make a difference. Because like the title of the report itself said, this is a preventable crisis we are facing right now. It's not one that has to happen. It's not unavoidable, it's not unsolvable, and if we do what we need to, instead of the problem getting worse like it has over the last 30 years somehow, instead millions of lives can be changed and tens or even hundreds of thousands of lives can be saved over the next 30 years to come. But let me know what you think. Just out of curiosity in the comments, let me know how many sunscreen misinformation reels, TikTok shorts do you see on a daily basis? Mine is about 20. Do you agree with the changes that APPG is recommending? Or do you still think the dangers of UV exposure are being blown out of proportion? They're not. I'm just gonna tell you that.